Fortunately, this is not a technology conference.
You guys aren't sick of me yet. Thank you so much. I've learned so much from that last presentation. Where's Julian? Stellar, thank you. I feel like I'm a terrible sight reader, so I got some really great tips out of that. It's great to be together as teachers. We're so siloed and do this thing on our own for so long. This is really great. So Christian has challenged me with answering this list of questions that I think some of you submitted before this conference. Is that correct? Raise your hand if you submitted a question. Okay, a few people did. There's definitely a lot more questions than there are hands in here, so maybe we can skip those people and just answer the ones that came. So this was supposed to be some technique Q&A, basically. I also don't feel qualified to speak on this subject. I feel like I've always had lots of technical troubles and had to learn them myself, but I hope that I can offer something that might help you or some new ideas to teach students. So I have a list of questions here, and I'm going to try to hit all of them. What do we have, like 40 minutes or something like that? Nancy, when do we stop this? 2:30?
You can be flexible with that.
I want to finish right on time. When do you need to stop? 2:30?
I think so.
Okay, yes, okay. I'll do my best. And it might be kind of rapid fire, but feel free to just interrupt if there's something else I want to help you there. So I mentioned in the first presentation that technique can be a loaded word. I think of it as purposeful movement of your body for musical ends, right? It can't exist without the musical ends. I always like to think if aliens were watching us, but they didn't have audio, and they could just see us sitting down, smashing our smallest extremities on this buck-tooth coffee table, but they would wonder what in the world we were doing. It's a very odd activity that our body is not necessarily made for, and we do it for many hours every day, and it's kind of weird if you take away the sound, right? Right. But I think it's just a healthy place to start from there, and I wanted to make these couple big points. That the mind and the body are trained together, that a variety of physical approaches for a variety of styles and sounds. Technique must be adaptable. In other words, the way we move our body to play a piece of Bach is quite different from the way we move our body to play a piece of Rachmaninoff. It's a different instrument that it's written for. It's a different physical demands and different priorities, I guess. So I personally, as a teacher, think you always have to teach music first, and then technique is in service of that, right? It's a little bit backwards to think of training technique as its own thing without the relationship to music. So I think that always has to be there. Technique always follows practice as well. If you think from a philosophical standpoint, no one figured out how to play Liszt transcendental etudes just overnight. It usually is the kind of development like this. A composer gets an idea of something that he wants to write. He writes the music, then figures out how to make the fingers play that music, right, generally. And then in response to that, sometimes piano manufacturers would actually change the instrument in order to get the sound that the composer or the composition is looking for. Famous examples just include simply extending the range of the keyboard. Bach is stopping there, and then Beethoven at the beginning of his life has up to this F, and then later gets up to the C. Chopin starts pretty much there and ends there. Liszt, by the end of his life, gets this A, and only to the last few composers we get those last few notes, right? So the technique of the instrument actually adapts first, and then the instrument gets changed. So there's this whole kind of universe that exists that way. Just some healthy adjectives. Let me hide this little thing. There you go. I think of these adjectives for good technique, which again is a loaded word. But number one, that it serves the music first. Number two, that it's healthy, as in good for your body, which is strange when you think of beating the buck-tooth coffee table. It's sustainable, meaning you can do it for long periods of time without having to change it. It's reliable and repeatable. It's efficient, meaning that it uses the least amount of energy to get the desired results, because we've all got other things to worry about when we're playing the piano. It's effortless, and it takes a lot of effort to become effortless. That's what I think the whole class will be about today, but it also allows you to play with power. The main problem, I think, with technique is because we're playing an art form that is designed to be emotional contagion, right? So we're trying desperately to reach our audience with some kind of emotion, and that should take our minds out of our bodies, right? Have you had those experiences ever where you're playing and you kind of just forget that you have a neck or something like that? And then you realize, oh no, I haven't breathed in a while. I had an experience like this last week. Actually, I was deep into practicing and kind of working on some pieces for a while, and my students barged in my office without knocking. And I turned around and started to cough uncontrollably because I hadn't swallowed maybe for the last 15 or 20 minutes. And I had just been really deep into the music. You know, that's natural, and I think it's a good thing. But it's part of what we have to do. These are some famous caricatures of Franz Liszt playing concerts in the 19th century. And you can see what the artist sort of captured from that recital. And you know, these are amazing contortions from the pianist. Some of them look very painful, but those are all things that we witness sometimes in piano recitals. Sometimes I think to outsiders they seem odd because they're not actually making the buttons go up and down, but they're often because the artist is so deep in the music that they can't help but move their body in a way that goes along with that music. That's my personal hell, is having to watch a video of myself playing, because it's just very painful. But that's a very good thing. So I mentioned in the last presentation that study about motor commands. So a neurologist got together with several musicians and actually monitored the motor centers of musicians while they play, and started to count individual commands. And he did determine that playing the piano, of all of the different instruments that he studied, and also some sports as well, that the piano had more motor commands per second by far than any other instrument. That surprised me because I thought maybe organ might have a little bit more with your feet going at it, but it's still piano. He used this piece to test it as Chopin Fantasy Impromptu, and he was measuring every one of these flexors and extensors of the forearm, every reposition to change spacing, wrist, elbows, shoulders, pedal, everything, and it was more motor commands per second for playing the piano than anything else. So there's a cool article, you can check it out there, about pianists being the super athletes of the world. Yeah. Most of the questions I think in here have to do with some of these specific technical questions, but as again to kind of frame the discussion, most of the problems that pianists deal with is a tension at the wrong time and in the wrong places usually. So when we're talking about muscular tension and release and exertion, in any healthy movement of your body, period, there's always recuperation after the contraction, right? So that is a very easy concept to understand when you're not thinking about it, but when you're playing music, it is very, very hard. So I just want to do a couple of little tension checks with you. These are fun things you might be able to do with your students as well. And we can do some of them, I hope, together today. So if you've got a pencil with you, what you can do is, and I think I left mine in my chair over there. I've got an Apple pencil here, that sort of work. So when we think about, oh, thanks, yeah, thank you, sir. I appreciate that. SUU. Woohoo. Okay. So we think about being neither too tight nor too loose. You usually learn how to hold this before you play the piano. I certainly did. And I want you to, we're going to do 3 autographs. I want you to sign your name on the paper 3 times. The first time, I want you to just squeeze the ever-loving lead out of the pencil. I want you to squeeze it as hard as you can while you write. And notice what your body is doing and sign your name. I think if you're really holding it the most, you might have noticed that your wrist locked up and that you maybe started to make the letters with your elbow or your shoulder, right? That's kind of a normal thing. I want you to sign a second one, and this time I want you to just take your other hand and place the pencil in your fingers. Wow, I left some calluses there from that last exercise. And just let it rest in your hand, however you like to hold a pencil, and then try to sign your name. Now, without thinking about it, without some crazy guy telling you how to hold the pencil, sign it normally and notice what you do with your fingers and your hand and arm. And hopefully your last signature looks the best. You're finding that Goldilocks zone of just enough tension. And I love how Christian mentioned this in his body mapping talk. Because if you're telling a student to relax everything, then what happens? You're going to be in a puddle on the floor. So it's a little bit about finding where to put just the right amount of tension. I don't think any good piano playing is tensionless or resistance-less. It always has some in the right places. Another way that I work with my students to kind of get their brain wrapped around that concept is to have them hold an imaginary cup of tea. It's very, very hot. Okay, maybe it's hot water or something. It's going to burn you if you spill it. And then, if you just have to sit there and sip it, that's no big deal. But what if suddenly, in the door, walks your best friend we've never met before?
Hi.
Your best friend who you haven't seen for 10 years, and you are just so excited to see them, and you have to control your emotions, or this is going to spill everywhere. It's so much like playing a piano piece. You have this very delicate thing that can't hurt you, right? And when you're filled with emotion, it totally changes what your body is doing and makes it much more difficult to complete the task. I'm going to skip ahead now. These are some things that we may be able to do together if you're willing to do this. So we're kind of post-COVID, I hope. I wish we had some hand sanitizer in the room. It looks like there's some up here. So I want everyone to find a partner. Just put your things down, stand up to shake their hand. We're just going to do a quick little handshake, and I guess if you want some hand sanitizer, it's right here. And can I just have one volunteer? Anybody wants to shake my hand? Anybody? Come on up. What's your name? Topher. Sorry? Topher. So I've never heard the name before. That's beautiful. Oh, great. Christopher without the Chris. I like it. Topher. Okay, everyone can find a partner and do this. One of you needs to be the shaker and one the shakey. If you don't feel comfortable, you don't have to do it, and you can just watch. So I'm going to do this first. I'm going to squeeze your hand, okay? And then I want you to shake my arm around. So what you're going to do first is shake from my shoulder, and yeah, you can kind of shake it back and forth and feel that it's dropped, right? I'm going to lock it for a second, try to shake it, right? And then I'm going to relax it, shake it around. And then maybe up and down here from the elbow joint that Chris was showing us. Shake up and down. So I'm going to try to keep my grip firm while I'm doing that, and then I'm going to lock it, feel the difference. Great. And then just, this is the hardest one, I'm going to squeeze a little bit. Try to roll my wrist around like this. Right, while I keep that firm. Okay. Yeah, it's a little bit harder, right? So, okay, do it again. Looser now? Yeah. Okay. Good. So that is something that you cannot see, but I'm going to do it for you now and see if we can get you to be a little bit more relaxed. So you can just squeeze my hand as hard as you want. That's great. Good. Handshake. Okay. And then, yeah, you must be a pianist. Good. Keep your grip tight. Keep it so tight that I can't pull it out. Great. Excellent. And so yeah, first focus on just letting this hang and be loose. Isn't that nice? Good. And then your shoulder as well. Yeah. And your elbow. Yeah. Keep that nice and loose. Good. And then your wrist. And you let your wrist just kind of freely hang. I'll move it. You don't have to move it. Oh, nice. Learn very quickly. Good. Oh, okay. You have to see that. That was great. In most of our lives when we're not playing this thing, most of those groups contract together, right? Think about being in a car with a crazy driver. Sharp turn, you grab onto whatever you can. Maybe it's the little handles up here. And then everything locks. Everyone simulate that for a second and feel, right? You're trying to stop your body. Your grip squeezes, but you also lock here and here. So it's a very unusual activity, I think, to play the piano because this needs to have some degree of firmness while the rest stays loose, which is very unusual. That little handshake thing has been most successful for me in getting students to try to simulate that feeling. It's very odd, right? But I've noticed that when I'm thinking about it, I kind of walk around the rest of my day doing things like that too. You go to open a door, you don't do this, but you just need a little bit of tension there and do a little rotation. some of these other ones, if I'm working with students and I can see that there's some extra tension there that they don't need, the most common of which are this or this, then what I've found is that getting them some kind of sonic feedback is sometimes faster than me micromanaging their body. But what you'll hear when this happens, I'm just going to play a little 5-finger pattern like this. And on the fall board, you might hear something like this. They're not able to get the weight of their arm through their fingers on every note because they're holding this kind of artificially. But if you can train them to drop, you should hear quite a different sound on a table. That's a little bit more like knocking for each finger. And usually the fourth finger is a little bit trickier than the others to do. So I have students play entire pieces or long excerpts here. When I can't hear, they can play with an even tone. Fantasy impromptu. Right, you can hear it. Or even just scales. Again, if this is usually tight or they're holding excess tension, you'll hear that kind of squishy sound. Right, so that's another little trick you can try. I think I'm going to skip the other ones and maybe go straight to the questions that you had. This is some things from my pedagogy class. That is the book that Christian recommended. Highly recommend that for some of the body mapping things. It's really wonderful. That's long physiology. Here's another little group of tests that you can do that just show position and posture. Some of the first question that I got was, how do you develop a healthy technique with beginner students? I think it's much easier to build great technique with total beginners, and I enjoy that process so much. It is very hard to unlearn or to reteach or retrain students, especially in their teenage years. But it can be done. It just has to be done with a lot of thought. So the basic one, I think that Christian was showing us too, with where the head and the spine align. This is the other probably top 5 problems with pianists anatomically. Things get difficult. I'm going to use the driving analogy again, and we'll sit up here. But when it's snowy in Logan and there's snow and ice all over my windshield, I always notice that. And then, it's something difficult and uncomfortable, and so we start to do this thinking that we get a little bit better visual through the windshield. It's actually making it worse because you're getting closer to that debris or whatever it is, right? So you're seeing a little bit less, and I have to tell myself, stop doing it. Okay. So forehead head syndrome, yeah, we do that when things get difficult or when we lose kind of sense of posture, ourselves in the music, and that's something that my students know. I'll just come and just touch their shoulder, and that's all I have to say or do, and then they'll return back to this position. But your head, you can imagine, holding a gallon of milk like this won't be so bad, and if it's a couple of inches out, that's a little heavier, and that's even heavier. That's what that is showing there, the actual pounds, pressure pounds on your spine. Your head's very heavy, and the further forward it is, the more problems that you have. So, and all of us are getting so much worse with this now because of this. We're walking around like this all the time. So just be aware of that. I would say forehead head syndrome is the biggest thing. And to see where it kind of gets into your fingers as well, you can see, I want everyone to do this because to feel what your students are feeling. Something that's very difficult. Put your head forward like this guy there. Really stretch it forward. If you're reaching at kind of the extreme of your movement range, you should feel some tension in your neck and trapezius, right? You feel that up there? Well, now, if you want to relieve that, raise up your shoulders a couple inches. Do you feel it go away? Go back to normal. Drop your shoulders. Head forward, like those people on the interstate. And then raise your shoulders. And did you feel some of the tension go away? Right? Isn't that weird? That is a kind of a natural reaction, so you see where that starts from. It starts from their head being forward, and then this comes up to compensate, and now you're a mess, you can't play the piano, right? Because this is pinched, right? So you have less movement with your shoulder, and if you have less movement with your shoulder, you can't do anything with your fingers. You have to be quite free to play anything like scales or arpeggios, chords. This has to swing freely with the position of the fingers. If it's tight, you can't do anything. So I would start with their head, just getting them to kind of sit at their tallest and sit with like, I know everyone just moved in the room, but to sit with like your ears, basically what Christian was saying, balanced over your spine, so you're sitting at your tallest while you're playing, and to try to come back to that. So students, if you're trying to retrain a student that has been maybe taught with some not so good habits, I found the most effective way is a timer, a recurring timer in the lesson or in the practice session that just goes off every minute. You can set your iPhone to do that, and that's just, oh, okay, start playing again. And maybe over the next minute this starts to happen again. But I think with about 6 weeks of doing that regularly, you really can change the habit, and it's a very powerful thing. I've had students that were completely a mess, that could not do anything with their fingers, who went to playing quite powerfully some Chopin studies. There's our worst example, Mr. Glenn Gould, of how to sit at the piano. But that is kind of a delicate subject. Mr. Gould sits like this because he mostly is playing Baroque repertoire. You hear all these wonderful sparkly articulations when he's playing. He plays a lot like this. Think of Baroque keyboard, it's pretty limited range as well, and there's not many things as far as scales and arpeggios in that music. It's generally smaller figurations, so it can actually kind of work, and it gives him a little bit better finger leverage, but it's not advisable for playing most piano repertoire. This is a good diagram from a very old teaching method book that I love about the proportions you want to look out for in your students. Most of us know this already, but it's kind of helpful to see it in a diagram. I've had students of all shapes and sizes. The worst one was a student I taught through his teenage years who started kind of in a normal sitting posture, and by the time he was a junior in high school, he was so tall, this boy was so tall, that sitting with the bench at its lowest, his knees could not fit beneath the piano. And so it was a big problem. We had to get a special box for him to kind of sit a little bit lower. But you can see the two main proportions that should change sitting height and distance for pianists. They're very simple. The first one is the trunk length. That's from the shoulders down to the tailbone. And you can see in this diagram that all three of those have a different length trunk, and that changes the sitting height. Yo.
I have a couple of students in the same family with that problem.
Yeah.
And so at home, their parents put their pianos
Higher.
up on.
See, that's a problem because the pedal block then becomes too high. And that means the foot is like this trying to pedal. I've
It
seen
is
that
higher.
too, some casters that take it up. If you do that, it's even a problem with these dollies. That actually starts to, it's a niche technique thing, but you can kill some bad pedal technique because it's stressing that out. So if you can get a craftsman to lengthen the pedal rods and lengthen the pedal block, then it helps too. But I think sitting on a shorter box or bench is helpful. Yeah, if you got some very tall people, then it can look a little funny. The other measurement there is the upper arm, right? So the longer that is, the higher the seat should be in general. So work on them finding that seated position. I love how Christian was pointing this out. The scapula to finger test, the scapula is floating. Everyone do this, reach around your back right here, feel your shoulder blade. And then this motion, which we use in and out on the piano. Move your hand like this. Do you feel it moving, your shoulder blade? Yeah, that's all connected. So that's very important. The head's in the right position, the shoulders are free. Or this motion cannot be free. Right? The other one, I love how he mentioned your arm starts here. That's genius. Yeah, the collarbone, the clavicle does move. It has some flexible cartilage right here, and it does move. So same thing. Put your hand on your clavicle, your collarbone here, and do the same thing, reaching forward. Do you feel it move? It has to be free from great piano playing. For He mentioned that the spine is flexible. It's true that the spine does flex also this way a little bit, right, to play the piano. It's weird, it's a squarular instrument, but we do use that for extreme positions, reaching over here and here. If you're trying to find I think the best maybe hand position or curve for the students, what a lot of folks don't say about hand position is that it depends on the notes that you're playing, right? That a position of all black keys, Chopin always taught B major first because of the shape of the hand. That's just a natural shape that you get when you're walking. So if you're ever trying to find a student's natural hand position, the main differences of pianists that matter for playing music is the length of the finger to the length of the palm. I have kind of stubby fingers and a big palm, but some people have longer fingers. And to find that natural position the way they should look, playing most, I'll say, idiomatically written music, should just be if they walk across the room. So you just have them walk and then freeze and look at their hand. That should be about how it should look when their hands touch the keyboard. It's the most natural way. You don't find anyone walking like this, and you also don't find anyone walking like this, right? There it
Just
is.
as you.
So this is the way I was taught for a few years, and it's helpful for some white keys positions and certain kinds of repertoire for clarity, but that's the general thing. Also notice, especially with teaching beginner and intermediate students, because they're sitting at the piano, it's unfamiliar activity, that they do keep their elbows very close to the body. They do this kind of T-Rex thing. So I have them imagine putting like a tennis ball or a lemon in their armpits just to keep this open. And a way that you can work with your students, everyone can try this, is before they sit down to play, have them reach up and do just a perfect circle like they're hugging a tall tree, right? And then let their arms come to the keyboard. And you find that openness in the clavicle, shoulder, and beneath the arms as well. Okay, I think it's time to go to your other questions. And I have some answers, I think. I don't have them all. So I just will give a few pointers. For that question of developing healthy technique with beginner students, I would say making them familiar with those kind of posture and position checks that are important to you would be really great to do weekly in lessons. I really believe in playing simple music, technically simple music that is written by those idiomatically brilliant composers. So those are ones that understand the topography, the geography of the keyboard, and write the beginner methods according to that. So that would be composers like the Four C's, Czerny, Kramer, Clementi, Chopin. It would also be some of those other great idiomatic writers like Heller, Bergmüller, Gerlet. Those are fantastic. It would not generally be composers like Haydn, Beethoven, Schumann, Tchaikovsky. Those are the I don't care composers. Those are the composers who start with the sound in their head and then bring it to the keyboard. And they're often, I always think of that Far Side cartoon where it's a guy, I don't know if you've ever seen this, there's a possum laying in the middle of the road, and there's a guy driving the truck to paint the stripes, and it's just got him looking out the window. He painted the stripes straight over the dead possum. He says, not my job. That's the way I think of those composers. It's not my job to make it feel comfortable for you. You figure it out. Those composers are not good as starting material for students with technical struggles or posture struggles. So I'd say find some great idiomatic writing. I firmly believe in scales and arpeggios. For simple kind of note production things, I do some simple things with beginning students in the first couple of lessons. I do have them do some very simple integration exercises. I don't even tell them what I'm doing, but I just tell them to do it. That would be starting with without the thumb in some short positions like this. I'll start with finger 2 on D and have them play the note. And while their finger stays in contact with the piano, I have them move their wrist this way, and then move their elbow, and also move their shoulder. Everyone do that for a second. It's so funny. If you walk around piano conferences like MTNA and people are talking about technique, they're all saying these very complicated things all the time about, Taubman this and, whatever that. But they're all doing that same motion, which is maintaining the resistance in the finger, and they're talking like this all the time. It's this, yes, it's this. It's this has to stay resistant and in the center of the key, it has to have some firmness to it so it doesn't collapse, right? See that all the time. While this remains free and able to move. So do that with your students. I would highly recommend it. Once they can do one note, you can work with them for a while, just doing that one note. You just feel free to move around if you want to see any of this. I think we should do it like this. Is that better? This is produced from a quiet hand, and that they can maintain the contact with the key while keeping everything else free and loose. If you want to see if your student is actually loose in those places that matters, I would highly recommend having them sit on the floor. At this height, there is a certain amount of tension you can't see in their shoulder, but will become very obvious when they're sitting on the floor. So you can I have a volunteer? Anybody want to try this? A little master class, come on up. Okay, what's your name? Bo. And that's the other half of not. See, let's sit on the floor. You're a great tall guy. So just sit just straight on our knees. Down here. And I want you to do that same thing. Sit as low as you can, and just right hand, second finger on D. Good. He is locked right here, right now. Did you see that? When I pushed, it didn't do when you shook my hand. It stopped and froze, right? So drop your shoulder, please. Yes. You shrug it all the way up to your ears, and then drop it. Yep. And now play finger 2 on D. I want you to hold all the way out to the edge of the key. So you basically hang on to the edge of the clip and let this fall beneath. Yep. Like this. What are you doing here? Like that finger is the only thing stopping it from you falling off the cliff, right? So if I push this off, I'm still not loose. That should fall in your lap. Push that on. That should just drop. You try. Like a pendulum. You want to push mine? I'll sit a little bit lower. Push it. You should see it swing like whoop, whoop, whoop. That should not go like that, right? Excellent. Bravo. You changed it. That your student is dropped, that's a great way to check, and it's hard to do that in a sitting position. Have them sit on the floor and try that. If it's really relaxed from the shoulder, it'll just drop in their lap, or it'll freely swing like Christian was describing. I'll look at 5 minutes and like 13 questions. That's not going to happen. Okay, maybe we'll save some of those for the Q&A. Is there time? Okay, just please stop me. Okay, great. The second question, actually to finish this, really the most important second thing after that is teaching them how to just connect 2 notes while keeping those things dropped. So I do spend a week or 2 with students having them just to raise this next finger, just to say hello, and then drop it. And you've heard it described as weight transfer, but to move their arm over that finger alone, and then let the arm return to neutral again. Just a couple of notes like this. 2 and 3, they're easiest fingers to do it with. Avoid the thumb for a while if you're trying to build that. After 2, 3, 4, and 5 are built, then you can start to add the thumb back. The thumb operates a little bit differently. It's a little bit more like flicking. So I love those exercises, and when I'm even trying to rebuild some students' techniques, I'll have them do just a 1-octave scale for a while. The second question is, how long should I be practicing technical exercises each day to best benefit my development as a pianist? Can I ask who asked this question? Is the person here? Okay, we'll skip over it. No, I'm just kidding. Because I think the answer to this depends who you are and what your goals are and what you're doing. That's quite different for every pianist. I'd say the only rule that I would have, if there is a rule, is it shouldn't be more than 1/4 of your practicing. It really depends on the person. For a beginning student, if they're practicing, an hour a day, split up throughout the day, that shouldn't be more than 15 minutes of any kind of exercises. But for an advanced student, it might be up to an hour of 4 hours total if you're practicing that much. It also just really depends on what you're doing. If it's someone that is, I'm retraining, like I have all bad technical habits and I need to rebuild their technique from the beginning, it's 100%. It's only exercises to drop repertoire for a few weeks because of those very reasons that we mentioned about music flooding the body with emotions. So if I wanted to really make a change, they can't play any old music, and they have to really focus on something brand new. So it's a tough question. I was going to ask who the person was. Number 3 was, what's the best way to play faster, clearly, and accurately? I'd love to know the answer to that as well. I just wanted to suggest 2 things. I don't have a good piece of music here that's best to show with an example, but the first is slow practice. The slower you go, the faster that you'll get there. And slow practice can take many forms, but I'd say generally that kind of half tempo range, maybe that 85% range. It must be slow enough to clearly hear every note. And that's a problem that's kind of unique to the piano. It's one of the easiest instruments to play, but one of the most difficult to master. You play ukulele. Ukulele is harder to play than the piano. This makes everything easy. We just touch a button and it makes the sound, right? Ukulele is more involved in that you need to put this tension on the string and tune it and pluck it. So we have the easiest instrument to play, perhaps, but the hardest instrument to master, really, the repertoire. That makes it very difficult. The problem is pianists, even at the intermediate level, can play notes faster than they can hear them, right? You notice that with some students? They're playing, everything's working great here. They are not aware of what they're doing. My favorite example was a student that I had in a performance. This entire Schubert impromptu with one pedal. Left. Everything is just going great, but I don't think she heard a note that she was playing because it stayed just down. I actually took out my phone and just videoed it because I didn't think she'd believe me. But yeah, I think sometimes the main problem is that we have an incomplete hearing of the music, and that's where it has to start, is with very clear hearing. And that means sometimes separating textures, taking just parts of lines in that piece. This kind of slower practice to at least be clear. I also really enjoy and believe in those kind of core rhythms and separating passages that are fast into little groups. I need to think of an example. I was trying to practice this in some groups the other day, and it was hard because it was in groups of 6. But this Chopin Etude, having the kind of core stopping rhythms where you stop on the first of each group is very helpful. So it's a group of 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1. Then this first core rhythm will be the most important. You continue, but you stop and freeze. And pausing on that note for a moment gives your ears a chance to reflect and think back and hear what went wrong, and then what might I need to adjust. So I'm a firm believer in those for being able to play faster and more accurately. Christian, it's 2:30. Should I stop? Should I answer the rest of the questions?
You can answer a couple more.
Okay, a couple more.
Maybe somebody is here who asked one of those questions
Okay.
and it's just
maybe
dying.
we should, yeah. If you see your question up there, raise your hand. You've got one?
You don't have to answer. I asked about trills. How do you teach trills?
Okay, that's a fast one, I think. Okay, so with trills, I would say every good trill is a combination of fingers, which is from the flexors and extensors of the hand. The same muscles we use to grip are the ones we use to push the key down, except for the thumb. It's a little bit different. We also, in good trill playing on a modern piano, have to use some rotation. That's one of the problems is we want to get it so clean in Mozart. And if you go back to play on the Mozart forte piano, I mean, you can blow on the keys and they'll go down. It's so light and easy. And you see Mozart's own trill exercises where he was doing silly things like this. And even on the same note. Even practicing 4 and 5, I never ever would advise a student to trill with 4 and 5 unless absolutely necessary. But it was a different instrument, right? So that's the first thing. But on the modern piano, which is so heavy, it's unless you're a Superman, you need a combination of this ulna and radius rotation as well as fingers to make it work. And then I think everyone has their own personal favorites, but finding fingerings that really work for the student's hand size and finger are really great. For me, you only have 4 kinds of combinations. White, for me, is usually 1-3, and or 2-3. White, black is usually the same, 1-3 or 2-3. Black, white is the hardest one for me. That I usually do with 2-4. The reason you see that in some editions, hold your arm like you're looking down the barrel of a gun, rotate the ulna and the radius that Christian was having you do. And you see the axis of it is generally, the part that's not moving as much is right about here, right? So that's the axis. That means that generally you get less rotation when you're closer to the axis. So 2 and 3 in some ways is harder than 2 and 4 to get the rotation mechanism. Even if it feels uncomfortable, I would advise trying it. And then black is, I usually do the same, 1-3 or 2-3. I have one teacher that got me hooked on an alternating trill of 1-3, 2-3 in some cases, and I use that for most like classical things right now. It feels weird at first, but eventually it works out. But I think trills have to be built slowly. The other thing I would say is that, Christian, you know this, it's always more important for them to be clear and slow than fast. So usually when trills are failing, it's right, they're trying to cram too many notes in. So I always have my students meter and notate their trills, even if it's something very odd like a 6-tuplet or 7-tuplet or something like that. Okay, is any other questions about trills?
No, I hope a couple people in here listened.
Okay.
They may have heard this before. That's
Okay.
awesome.
Yeah, metering trills, that's, I learned that from Emil Gilels. My teacher I think his trills are absolutely incredible. Brahms concerto and stuff like that. This pianist, anyone know Emil Gilels? This pianist? Really incredible, always full and singing trills. But they're never, like blazing fast. They're just so clear and expressive and beautiful. He was practicing next door to my teacher, and she heard him playing something like that. Or dividing the trill into different groups and putting accents on them. Which is a little bit odd for a lot of intermediate students. They think of that as being 3 groups of 2. But he was on purpose putting this, and they were clear every time. So my teacher went and knocked on his door and said, "What are you doing? Do you always measure your trills out like that?" And he said, "Does anyone not do that?" So I do that in my repertoire, and I encourage students to do that, except for extremely long ones. It's a little bit different. You had a question?
I was just wondering what your answers would be to 5 and if you have a time limit.
5. So you can play it pedaling. So just trying to pedal in between chords to get things connected. I like to do a 1-finger exercise with students. Have them play a normal legato scale. And then ask them to play this with 1 finger but get the same sound. Have them do it very slowly. And then using the pedal and just 1 finger. Not allowed to use legato just to try this. This, which is finger with the foot like they're tied with a string, or you do this. Right? If it's 2 notes at once and kind of getting them to be used to that process. Finger, foot, finger, foot, finger, foot. That's the only trick that I have. Have you done this before? Try it out. It also works with any hymn. But I don't know if I'm answering your question so well. But try that little 1-finger trick. You can work on the sound. Anyone else? Other questions?
What is the middle pedal for? Someone asked me, I've played the piano my whole life, someone asked me that and I have no idea.
It's different on many instruments, but on a modern piano, if it's working well, it will hold the dampers of the keys that are depressed. So if it's down here, and I push this down, then this one is not working. That's great, but it just should hold the ones that are there. But it's different on every piano.
What if it's not? I have never tried the substitute pedal where it only held the notes that you played. You always have some other
Something. Yeah, you need a good technician to regulate it. And I myself, like on pieces, I very rarely use it except for in modern music where it's specifically required or needed. I have a couple pieces of Debussy where I'll use it in conjunction with Una Corda doing something. This is a passage in Image Book 2 that has this crazy mix of harmonies, but I can't make sound work without sostenuto. Truth is, most of the composers that we play didn't have it either. You don't see it really till the early 20th century. So Debussy never had it, even though I love to use it in Debussy. Any other questions? Sorry, I didn't get to all of these. I'm terrible with time management.
Nothing else says any.
13?
11.
11. Octaves. Yeah, wow, I'm still trying to figure out what octaves. That was something that like felt easier when I was younger and is getting harder now. But I think the problem with octaves is so different from the rest of what we do with piano. There's really 6 different levers we use to play piano. That one, right? Very rarely. There are people who can control just the last knuckle, but we don't usually use that for piano playing. That knuckle, that's number 2, that's number 3, that's number 4. That's number 5, that's number 6, right? So octaves only use that, and that, right? So it's really a much more kind of muscular and big muscle groups kind of thing. And I think it really depends on the passage. I don't know this piece, Asturias. Is it, could you play a little bit?
Oh, it's not her question.
Oh, no, it's just, okay, rapid octaves, releasing tension and maintaining stamina. Okay, one thing about stamina, I will say, octaves feel like they need stamina, but I would say if you're thinking about that in your practice, it may be the wrong way of thinking about it. I've heard that said, I need to build endurance in my pieces, I need to build endurance. Most of those technical problems are not a strength thing. I have like an 8th grade girl body here, so I can make a big sound with the piano. But it usually is like if you're having to endure your technique or build stamina, there's probably something that's not working in the right way. Like it's building fatigue over a long period of time. But for like octave groups, you can practice with direction towards the groups. I need to demonstrate. Let's say you needed to play a scale. Like this. And you needed to break it down into groups to start to build it. You would find where the meter puts those. Maybe it's, that's where the first beat is, and so you have to think. You have to make some notes not as big of an emphasis as others so that you have a chance to relax. Yeah. My problem with octave playing is I don't use this enough. So it's all kind of like balancing proportions of different motions. I use this too much, activating from the tricep, and then my wrist gets locked. So I have to sometimes do some isolation practice just to build this. It's helping to do. You can't see the piano right now. Let's sit over here. But just starting with some simple repetitions, like you're dribbling a basketball, or knocking. Some people say you don't knock on the door like this. Usually, you might knock like this. I'm just getting into balance. Wrists in isolation first, because if that's working, then they can experiment with kind of adding a little more sugar here, a little more flour here, depending on volume and what you're doing. So, yeah, hope that helps a little bit.